What is up, guys? Warrior67 here, and this week's video has finally arrived. This week we're going to be talking about video games and interactive software as a means to garner and foster empathy between different groups of people. It's a topic I'm really excited to talk about, so let's get into it. Alright, so for those of you guys who don't know, I spent this past weekend at Global Game Jam 2016, which is this international 48-hour hackathon where groups get together and develop and prototype video games. And it was super, super cool. It was really awesome. I'm a programmer, and so it was really interesting getting to work with artists and sound designers and game designers, and then to also implement the games that we made. And my group in particular created a game called An Alarm is Ringing, which I'm going to link down in the description. I'll link you guys to the site where it's being hosted. But An Alarm is Ringing is a text adventure. It was inspired by a game called Depression Quest, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And it was meant to bring the experiences of living with an obsessive-compulsive tendency and allow people to kind of go through and experience what that's like through game mechanics. So it's a text adventure with different graphical user interfaces that are generated over the standard text adventure model that we then manipulate in order to kind of simulate these intrusive thoughts and intrusive ideas and obsessive ideas that we then use compulsions to kind of deal with. And obsessive-compulsive tendencies, for those of you guys who don't know, are symptoms in a wide variety of mental illnesses, particularly in OCD, which I'm sure everyone's heard of before, but also in obsessive-intrusive thoughts, in anxiety, in body dysmorphic disorder, and in depression, and a whole host of other mental diseases. And so for the majority of the population who's neurotypical and who doesn't ever really experience what living with an obsessive-compulsive tendency is like, we wanted to create a game that can kind of break that experience down into a tangible and accessible experience that for people who don't live with that, maybe they can sit down for 20 minutes and play a video game, and through interacting with the software kind of understand from a more hands-on perspective what it's like living with these things. Now, you can never simulate someone else's experience, and that's going to be something super important as we go into this discussion on empathy. You can never simulate someone else's personal experience, but you can try to craft an experience of your own and then give it to them and have them interact with it, and to hopefully broaden their horizons or change their perspective a little bit. And so our game was inspired by a game called Depression Quest, which you guys should see in the video is on screen right now. Depression Quest is a straight-up text adventure. It was created and written by an individual who suffers from depression and then was programmed into a fully playable game. And the idea behind Depression Quest is to give neurotypical people a little hint, just a little peek into the life of someone living with depression. And this is not romanticized depression. This is not Hollywood depression or television depression. This is from an actual person who's struggling with something that is fairly debilitating in their own life. Choosing video games as a way to express these ideas and as a way to reach out to people and share experiences with them is something that is incredibly, incredibly powerful. Now, the reason that video games are so different than other forms of media is that video games are inherently interactive, and that's not something that other media has. If you read a book, and the book has really strong characters, and you really relate with them, you can create empathy there. You empathize with them. If these characters are in situations that you aren't in, if they're in another country, or part of a different culture, or part of a different religion, you gain empathy with practitioners of that particular religion, or people who live in that country, or people who that is their culture. Movies are great at this, at eliciting a really powerful emotional response in a short time frame. And art is there to do the same thing. It's why paintings are paintings. It's why sculptures are sculptures. It is an artist who's trying to express something and who's trying to allow other people to interact with that expression. But all of these kind of passive forms of art that involve someone crafting art and then giving it to you, and then you kind of having your own perspective on it and doing your own thing with it, are just that. They are inherently passive. Video games as an art form and as a medium of entertainment are inherently active. They are interactive. You have to engage with them. You can't simply absorb them and then react to them. You have to actively choose to participate in them. And that is something that is incredibly powerful. Now, this participation comes in the form of game mechanics. So when you're playing Civilization, or you're playing COD, or you're playing Fallout, the different genres of games those are, whether that's third-person, first-person, strategy game, real-time strategy game, or turn-based strategy game, those are the mechanics. Now, mechanics have traditionally in video games been used as game gimmicks. They've been used as what is the entertaining factor of the game. If you were going to play a first-person shooter, whether that shooter was an arcade shooter or whether that was a realistic simulator shooter, the difference in mechanics there, in health regeneration, in ammo pickup, in weapon type, and weapon behavior, is what makes those games feel distinct from one another. Mechanics can transcend that, though, and can be used for narrative purposes. Anyone who's ever played a really, really responsive and immersive RPG knows that dialogue options are mechanics. And when dialogue options are implemented well, I'm going to use the example of Dragon Age and Mass Effect, because those are two series that I absolutely love, which I feel like have really, really well fleshed out dialogue. You can interact with characters and you can immerse yourself, and when you're trying to play an RPG game, which is so very pivotal to be immersed in, those things are incredible. So we can use mechanics not only to engage a player actively as far as playing the game is concerned, but we can also use mechanics as narrative. We can use mechanics to express ideas. We can use mechanics to emphasize themes that we are trying to show in our games. And this is where games as tools for empathy come into play, because narratively, there is such a powerful foundation in video games to craft stories and craft characters that I feel like a lot of times people tend to want to dismiss. People tend to want to say, no, you're never going to have as good stories in video games as you will in film or as you will in literature. You're never going to have masterpieces come from video games. There are masterpiece films and there are masterpiece works of literature, but you're never going to see that from a video game. Video games are fun, video games are lighthearted, and if they have a good plot, that's awesome, good for you, whether it's Halo, whether it's the Mass Effect series, when you have lore being built around it, good for you. But we're having fun here, and that's going to be the main goal. Video games are so incredibly powerful and unique because they have that interactive aspect. Now, it means we have to change how we interact with our audience as well. There are plenty of movies about depression, and there are plenty of movies about living with a mental disorder. However, when you're playing a video game and you're interacting with those mechanics, you can interact with different parts and different aspects of having this disorder. And when you feel immersed in a video game, and if you're immersed with a character who may be struggling with something, who may be struggling with whether that's a mental disorder or they may be struggling emotionally, you are forced to interact with those things in ways that film does not allow you to do. An example would be if you are going through a breakup and you are playing a video game where your main character has to make a choice about whether to pursue a relationship with another character. All of a sudden, that choice, which is very mundane maybe for 90% of the people playing, for you, that becomes incredible. Because you just felt lost in your personal life. And you're now given an opportunity to engage in trusting behaviors with someone. And you might not be ready for that. But is your character ready for that? And, your character who hasn't experienced the things you've experienced, are they going to react to that differently? And that's incredible because then I can open your mind to okay, maybe I need to react to this differently. Maybe I didn't think about that. Maybe, things aren't so bad and I am going to be able to trust again. And especially when we're talking about mental illness, we were crafting a game that was meant to be an experience that was meant to broaden people's horizon. Because a lot of time, mental illness gets romanticized in Hollywood and on TV and in just the media. So, OCD, we think about people who have to align all their forks or put all of their pencils facing the same way. And we can all laugh at that because that's comfortable and that's not debilitating. It's a quirk, and quirky things are funny and entertaining to us. But the reality is, for a lot of people living with obsessive-compulsive tendencies, whether that's real, legitimate OCD or whether that is a symptom of a different mental disorder, everyday life can be incredibly difficult in ways that most of us who are neurotypical will never really truly understand. and empowering those individuals to craft experiences that they can then give to neurotypical people to interact with and say, here, I cannot explain this for myself, but I can allow you to have a glimpse into my experience, is incredibly powerful, and that is how we create empathy. Now, empathy, in my personal opinion, is one of the most powerful forces at work in our global community today. Whether it's me, who is a college student in the United States, who can read a blog post by a young adult in a war-torn country who is experiencing every day a lack of security that I'll never understand truly, and to be able to interact with them and to feel like, yes, like, I know what you're going through. I haven't experienced it, but you've shared it with me, and I care for you, and I care about you, and I can understand. While I can't fully replicate or simulate that experience, I can understand that experience. Whether that's people from different cultures, in different countries, in places that I've never been and may never be, but I can know about their experiences, and I can know about what it's like to live in these other places. That's incredibly powerful. Empathy is what stirs love in individuals. Empathy is what causes us to donate thousands of dollars to places that are either under oppressive rule or terroristic rule, or have been hit with natural disasters. Empathy is what stirs the human race in some of its most resilient and powerful shows of unity. Empathy is what brings us together. Empathy is one of the best ways to combat hate and to combat violence and to combat oppression. And so to be able to express with our fellow man, to be able to interact with men and women and children all across the world and share a little part of ourselves and a little part of our experience in a deeply personal and interactive way is incredibly powerful. And I think as the indie scene especially begins to explode with games like This War of Mine, which was designed to broaden people's horizons to what it's like living in a modern war zone in somewhere like Syria, which is very much, a member of the modern world, but is right now incredibly oppressed and filled with war and violence every day. That was This War of Mine. Games like This War of Mine, games just like even The Stanley Parable, which for you guys who aren't aware is kind of like a walking simulator that is meant to comment on what it's like going through your everyday and working the 9 to 5 and kind of feeling like you're in this creatively oppressive space where, maybe this isn't what your life goal was, but it's kind of where you're at, and then how can we move on from that? Different indie games that aren't tied down to making a bunch of money, and so they're able to experiment with how they express themes and ideas. I think that's the market. You're going to find a lot of games beginning to pop up that use game mechanics in order to express emotions, or in order to broaden perspectives, in order to garner empathy. And those games are going to be super interesting because not only are they going to be entertaining to interact with and to play, but you're also going to get something a little bit deeper out of them. You're going to get the opportunity to experience things from a person's point of view that you may never have had before. There's an old saying that in order to really understand someone, you have to walk a mile in their shoes. And as much as we'd like to think that reading and experiencing film and documentaries are a great way to do that, they're inherently limited by the fact that we can't interact with them. Video games offer a relatively new and novel way to approach the mile in someone else's shoes problem. They are a way that will allow us to interact with people in a format that we've never seen before. Two kids from opposite sides of the world have never been able to build games and give them to each other and say, look, like, these are values that are important to me, and these are different things that I find incredibly interactive and enjoying, things that I enjoy. And that's incredible. And that is an awesome experience that we have right now. Now, I could go on and on and on about empathy in video games and how we use game mechanics as ways to create experiences. And I probably will next week. But I want to hear from you guys. So let me know, what games have you played that have really made an impact on how you viewed perhaps another group of people, or another culture? Have you ever played a game that really made you stop and think and say, like, huh, I never thought about it in that way? Have you ever played a game that really questioned something you believe morally? Have you ever played a game that phrased a issue that you thought that you were steadfast in a new light and made you question maybe why you felt a certain way? I want to hear all about that in the comments down below. I want to know what you guys, have you ever cried at a video game? Have you ever been excessively happy at a video game? What brought those emotions on? And how do you think that the mechanics in the game really helped you come to that conclusion and reach that really emotional state, whether that was positive or negative emotions? Let me know that in the comments down below. Thank you guys very much for sitting through the video today. I'm going to be trying to keep the videos to this format of being a little bit shorter. We're going to try to hopefully get to around 10 minutes per video. Eventually, I'll get there, I promise. But if you liked what we did today, hit that like button. If you want to continue in our discussion and you like what the channel's about, hit a subscribe button, where we will be trying to have these kind of discussions weekly. Like I said, I'm sorry it was a little late this week, but this is the kind of content you can expect in the coming weeks. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your time with me today, and I'll see you next week.